Hello, welcome back to Marathon Man, where I'm going through Doctor Who from the very beginning, and you join me as we kick off Season 4. Now that I've rewatched this story and broken the seal on Doctor Who's 4th season, I've only got one more story, 4 more episodes left with William Hartnell's first Doctor. Now, William Hartnell has always been one of my favourite Doctors, but with each marathon, I appreciate him more and more. I used to always get excited about the first regeneration because, well, let's face it, it's seismic and it's hard not to be excited for it, but this time, I find myself wishing it were further away. The whys and wherefores of Hartnell being replaced are well documented and likely something I'll cover in a bit more detail elsewhere. But the reason I mention it here is that there's kind of like a sense of unease that I get when I was watching the Smugglers or the reconstruction of it, which is that I don't see a man on his last legs. He is stumbling quite a lot at the top of episode 1, maybe acclimatising to his new co-stars, like there's no chair with a panda on it here. It's just that he does recover quite well and ends up putting in a really strong performance, holding his own against some really decent guest turns. Longfoot, Cherub, Pike and the Squire are all pretty fun characters and well drawn. John Ringham puts more into Blake than he strictly has to, but it does round out a fairly strong lineup of friends and foes. Hartnell though, best of the bunch, and it's really sweet how he conveys the Doctor's relief at not being alone again. The fact that he is glad to have Ben and Polly along for the ride is quite reassuring. I can foresee oodles of trouble might not be the best line ever written, but Hartnell does manage to weave something quite lovely out of it. He might sound cross with them for barging into the TARDIS, but he puts so much into the line,
I really thought I was going to be alone again.
that even though he's not giggling, even though we can't see him when he says it, we still know that he is glad Ben and Polly are along for the ride. And so am I. We've got to know them better than most before they jumped aboard. A whole 4-part story with which to get acquainted with them. So with their introduction out of the way, the Smugglers can focus on their reactions to their altogether alien situation. And they work very, very well. Ben is a great character. Different enough, again, from Ian and Stephen, although essentially fulfilling the same role, but more important than the action and the physical stuff, which he does acquit himself very well indeed. He's just a really good foil for the Doctor. Slightly distrustful of him, ready to question him, yet still savvy enough to respect and honour his wisdom. Michael Craze actually gives Hartnell quite a lot of decent stuff to play against, something he hasn't truly had since Peter Purvis took his first steps as Stephen. Polly, on the other hand, fulfills an equally important role. She is excellent as the mediator between the two of them. Sympathetic to Ben's reactions because they're probably very close to her own, but still open to the possibility that the Doctor is telling the truth. And her fitting like this between them is going to be really important as it goes on over the next couple of stories for not just her and Ben's respective relationships with the Doctor, but also for ours. Even without the Doctor, they work really well together as a team. That scene where they're trying to escape the prison cell while at the same time fretting about a rat, they just feel like old friends. And they inject this sort of fairly new dynamic into the show that really helps generate the feeling of a new beginning. I don't entirely disagree with Stephen Moffat when he claimed that the companion is, in many ways, the main character of the show. The Smugglers reminds me in a lot of ways of the Time Meddler in how it just gets on with it instead of mourning the loss of what has come before. It's something Doctor Who remembers, on the whole, to do every time there's a similar shift. Then again, perhaps this time it's just a hangover of the show not being overly fond of Dodo. Maybe it's just thinking, why Morna? The fact is, this is a really good initiation for new companions. It's their own planet, which gives them reason enough to doubt at least half of the Doctor's wild claims about the nature of his machine, but in a definite section of the past, so they then have to accept that half of the Doctor's wild claims. And with those new companions being the really rather fun Ben and Polly, this makes for a fairly enjoyable story. And they react accordingly to all the madness, and so it's a real relief to have companions acting like real people again, following Dodo's almost meta companion. However, the guest characters, the setting, and Ben and Polly are, without a doubt, its strongest features. I find it difficult to be too hard on it, because I really rather enjoy The Smugglers as I'm watching it, but I can't deny that the story itself is quite thin, and as many others have said before me, it's not one for sticking around in the brain for too long after having watched it. It struggles to keep everything moving for 4 episodes and has the feeling occasionally of sort of like drifting off, which will only have the same effect on me. As a result, it's my least favourite historical so far, but it still has some merits. I mean, it's got pirates and buried treasure, but it never actually truly feels like a Doctor Who story about pirates and buried treasure. And even though I like the characters and the cast and the setting, and it passes by fairly agreeably while I'm watching it, I always come away from it thinking, shouldn't it have been a bit more piratey? It starts off great, I think. The intrigue of Cherub following them and then killing Longfoot, and then before that the Doctor fixing Longfoot's dislocated finger, that's a really nice take on the Doctor proving his credentials and inveigling his way into the story. And then there's the whole business of the Doctor reading the playing cards. It all starts off really strongly. The Doctor also states outright of his moral obligation to stick around and sort everything out. Now, we may be at the point where we can take this as read because we're aware of the Doctor's moral code by this point, but crucially, like it didn't with Dodo, the show is remembering now that we're in new company with new characters who don't know the rules yet. So to take time for the Doctor to explain to them, no, we do good, we're going to stick around and sort this out, is a real tick for this story in my eyes. The Doctor is very different now from when he was showing the ropes to Ian and Barbara. So when it comes to teaching Ben and Polly, they're being shown the ropes by the Doctor, the hero. They simply cannot just go running off, which itself feels like it was taught to the Doctor by Ian and Barbara in An Unearthly Child. So despite all of this really good stuff, episode 4 really feels like it slams the brakes on. With just 3 episodes, it might feel like The Smugglers would be more kindly thought on, more fondly remembered. It's just that with that 4th episode to fill, it feels like it might be stretching itself a little bit too thinly. And it's not necessarily the 4th episode itself, just that there is a 4th episode that it has to fill. Because episode 4 does hold some good stuff. For example, Cherub has been so loathsome throughout that his death in this episode actually feels quite satisfying. And likewise, the climactic fight between the revenue men and the pirates. Going on earlier snippets of the story which actually exist, this might have been the highlight of the story if we could see it. Because I think the stills look fantastic, as do the exterior shots that we've got, and a lot of the existing clips as well, which are mainly the killings. They look like they're quite vibrantly directed. So I don't know whether or not it's the burst of moving images among all of the still ones that lead me to believe that this could be a fantastic looking story and that we're missing a treat on that by not having that fight at the end of episode 4, or those clips are shining through and that is how good it could all be. Basically, I don't just think that I'm going, oh, moving images, how great are they? I think it's basically that they're just good moving images, and that implies that the rest of the story could really live up to them. So I'm not laying the blame solely at the feet of episode 4. I'm just saying that if there was 3 episodes, then maybe we could lose some of the flimsier stuff elsewhere. So all in all, it is a mixed bag. I actually rather like stretches of it, but I can absolutely understand why it seems quite so forgettable to a few people. And I think that in part is because it ends up feeling almost more like a prologue. You've got a very, very sort of like seismic story in the next one before then Troughton takes over for the remainder of season 4. That this one ends up feeling just like a forward rather than a story in its own right. But I don't think it helps itself in that I also don't think it feels like a story in its own right, because it is actually quite a thin one. Regardless of everything else that happens directly after it in season 4, The Smugglers is still not weak sauce, but it's not strong enough to rise and stand in the ranks of 10th Planet Regeneration, Peril of the Daleks, First New Doctor, Highlander's New Companion, blah, blah, all of that. The Smugglers does stand apart a little bit. It had its work cut out, it just didn't do its homework. For example, as a running gag, mistaking Polly for a boy might have sounded funny on paper, but in the wash, it just comes out as insane. I mean, Polly is easily the most glamorously feminine of all of the Doctor's companions so far. You've got Dodo, I could maybe see it. Vicky at a push, although I didn't truly buy it completely in The Crusade either. But Polly, no. And salty pirates who have spent a long time at sea in each other's company, they would know too. The fact that they don't doesn't work for me. So 130 episodes into Doctor Who and I have only 4 left with Hartnell. And with everything that's happening behind the scenes about to manifest itself on screen, I do kind of see why the Smugglers gets overlooked. And on some level, I do think it's a shame because I am a little bit fond of it, but I also can't say that its reputation is entirely unearned.
I can't very well report back to a 17th century navy.
Ben has a great attitude to just dump in the past and see what happens. Special mention also to when the guard asks why he and Polly are screaming in their cell and Ben replies,
"Oh, nothing, we're just happy, mate, that's all."
How the hell do you mistake Polly for a boy? The least believable part of this story for me. As ever, thank you so much for watching. If you enjoyed this jaunt to Cornwall, then you know how YouTube works. Please give it a like and share, spread the word. I would be super grateful. And what do you think of the Smugglers? Is it better than its reputation suggests? And would it be even better thought of if it still existed? Or is it right to be consigned to David Jones's locker? Are Ben and Polly shaping up to be great companions, or can't they hold a candle to Dodo? Let me know in the comments below, and I'll see you back here soon for where we say goodbye to the First Doctor. So if you don't want to miss that, hit the subscribe button, clang the cloister bell, and I'll meet you at the South Pole.